So we've been on the topic of deployments recently in some of the past videos, and that has brought up the conversation of what if this and what if that. So I'm going to give you a few handful of like what if scenarios. They're the most common ones to kind of explain a little bit more about certain situations before and even during a deployment. What's up, my friends? Welcome to a new video. In this one, we got some different kind of questions that have been kind of brought up with the topic of deployments possibly being a thing now in the Army more often than they used to be, you know, in recent years anyways. And what if this happens? What if that happens? What if I'm in this situation before I deploy? What if this happens while I'm on a deployment? So to kind of hopefully fill some of that curiosity, some of your, things that you're wanting to know about, I'm gonna try to facilitate that in this episode. Now, before we get started, make sure if you're not already subscribed to this channel, make sure you join that Chaos Army by hitting that subscribe button. Even think about clicking on the bell so you can get alerts as soon as new videos go live, to include the live streams and become a part of the notification platoon. So let's talk about some different what if scenarios, mainly the more common ones. All right, so let's start off with the first what if type of scenario, starting off with injury specifically before a deployment. So let's say in a situation, a soldier got injured before deployment, whatever the circumstance was, maybe it was during PT, during training exercise, whatever the case might have been. They usually have some kind of recovery that has to go along with whatever the injury is. For more serious injuries, they might have something like convalescent leave, which is kind of like free leave or vacation or whatever to recover from that injury. Maybe something that required surgery may come with convalescent leave. So if it's that serious, they might have convalescent leave, and then when they return, then they have profile. And even if it's an injury that doesn't maybe require surgery or some kind of convalescent leave, then they might still go on profile to basically kind of have limited duty. That way they're kind of taking it easy to allow whatever it was that was injured to heal properly and then fully recover. So they could be on profile for a few weeks, for a month, or whatever the case could be, to be able to allow them to heal properly from that injury. They're being reassessed in between, somewhere's in there, and then eventually if the doctor goes and clears them, then they get off of profile. If they have to extend that profile, then they do so as needed. Now, if this happens before a deployment, well, then typically a soldier stays behind and tries to recover. And then at some point, maybe once they've recovered, then they may kind of show up a little bit later in the deployment, depending on kind of where the unit is at in that deployment. That also kind of comes down to how long the deployment is. If it's a short deployment, they may just keep that soldier behind. Longer deployments, maybe like a year-long deployment or something like that, then they may, have them come join them later. Now, the Army has gotten pretty strict with non-deployable status. So if an injury creates a situation where a soldier is going to be non-deployable, meaning they are not eligible to deploy due to their injuries, and it is going to be for a year or more, well, now the Army is pretty strict on that, and that soldier could be removed from the Army. This isn't like a dishonorable discharge or anything like that. It's more of like a medical discharge, or being medically separated from the Army if a soldier has some kind of injury that is going to make them non-deployable for 1 year or more. So the Army has gotten pretty strict on that. Before, they had situations where soldiers could be injured and be non-deployable for multiple years. The Army has gotten really strict on that in the recent years, and now they do not allow soldiers to be non-deployable for 1 year or more, otherwise they're going to be medically separated. So if it was a situation like that where the injury was serious enough to make them non-deployable for 1 year or more, then they could possibly be medically separated from the Army. Now maybe what if a soldier gets injured during a deployment? Well, in that case, it works very similar in some ways. You're going to be assessed by medics and everything and taken care of. And then for more minor injuries, you might just be in that deployment having to recover, be on limited duty, be walking on crutches if need be, probably stuck just manning the radio inside a tactical operations center if you can't do your job fully. So if it's for a minor type of injury, you're probably just going to be recovering while on that deployment if possible. For more serious ones, like maybe if it requires surgery or it's more of a serious injury, then they may send that individual back to the United States. A lot of times, like in Iraq situations, when soldiers got seriously injured, maybe from IED going off and they needed surgery or something more serious, they would usually get evacuated to Germany, and then there was a hospital in Germany that would take care of them, and then after a certain point, then they would be maybe moved back to the United States. And that could be a similar situation for like Iran, or maybe if we were to reoccupy Iraq or something like that in a more higher capacity like we were during Operation Iraqi Freedom, and something more serious, then soldiers could possibly be evacuated back to Germany for treatment at a hospital there, and then moved back to the United States, or maybe it's just simply all the way back to the United States. That just kind of depends, I guess, sometimes on the extent of the injury. But not any injury is just going to get you out of a deployment and get you sent back home. Like I said, minor ones, you probably just have to recover back on that deployment, be on limited duty, working the radios, and then more serious ones that maybe require surgery or something like that may constitute a soldier to be moved back to the United States or something. The next what if scenario that I want to give you is what if a soldier gets pregnant before deployment? Well, there's nothing illegal or nothing wrong with that. That is something that soldiers can do. They can, choose to have children and everything like that. So before a deployment, everybody goes through an SRP. It's kind of like a medical check and everything to make sure that you're capable of going on this deployment, whether it's a combat deployment or a non-combat deployment. During that process, the female soldiers will have to, do a urinalysis test to check to make sure that they're not pregnant or see if they are pregnant. If they are pregnant, then they will stay behind and deal with the pregnancy. It's not a punishment or anything like that. They're not going to get in trouble for this, but they will stay behind on the deployment, deal with the birth of the child, and then they probably have some kind of recovery time afterwards, and that they have to recover from giving birth to a child, and then that's most likely going to kick them out of the time frame of being able to rejoin the unit on the deployment, unless you had some kind of really crazy long one, which is not a thing that they normally do. Usually most deployments at most are 12 months or 15 months, so that's most likely not going to be a time frame that they're going to still send that female to that deployment. So they would stay behind and deal with the childbirth and the recovery operations and everything like that. Now, if it is during a deployment that a female was to get pregnant, then that could have a little bit of problems. So like during a combat deployment, men and women are not supposed to be engaging in sexual activities, so a female getting pregnant during a combat deployment is definitely wrong. I did have a situation with one unit where they had some kind of policy with married couples that were deployed together where they were allowed to engage in sexual activity. I don't know what would happen in that situation if one of the couples happened to get the person pregnant or whatever. I don't know if that would be okay. I don't really know. We won't get too deep into the cracks with those situations, but for the most part, usually during a combat deployment, that is not permitted. That usually also goes towards non-combat deployments as well. That may flex a little bit here and there between units, but for the most part, usually from what I heard from different units, most units have the same policy, even during a combat deployment or non-combat deployment, that sexual activity is not allowed during a deployment. So if it turned up that a female got pregnant during a deployment, well, they're going to get sent back to the States, but there's probably also going to be possibly some other repercussions from that. Maybe Article 15, I don't know to what extent the unit would want to pursue, but the unit's probably going to pursue some type of punishment. It probably won't be to the extent of like kicking that female out of the Army or anything like that, I wouldn't think. I guess that could possibly be an option. I don't know if that's allowed or a legal kind of option for them to pursue, but they could still kind of punish them for going against the orders, of that deployment, which included no sexual contact. So that female gets sent back to the United States, deal with the pregnancy, but then probably also have to deal with some kind of punishment to whatever level that unit wanted to punish that female for engaging in sexual activity and getting pregnant. Now, if she could prove that it was prior to the deployment that she got pregnant and they didn't discover it until during the deployment, then yeah, she probably is fine. But if it's something based on how far along she is, that she had to have gotten pregnant during the deployment, then yeah, she's probably gonna get in trouble for that. Now you might be curious, what if a soldier has a spouse that is pregnant? Does that soldier get to stay behind to be with the birth of a child and everything? So there's kind of different rules on that. For the most part, usually what I've seen some soldiers where they had a pregnant spouse. So they usually get stuck going on the deployment, but if that, depending on kind of how far into the pregnancy, I guess it really is. If they're already pretty far into the pregnancy, then they might stay behind to get to witness the birth of their child and then later join the unit. So then they still have to miss out on, some of the early times of that child's, early, times, they still get to witness the birth, I guess, but maybe only for maybe like a month or something like that before they have to go rejoin their unit in that deployment. If the spouse is still pretty early in that pregnancy, then they're gonna have to still go on that deployment, and then maybe when it gets closer to like the due date, then they might send that soldier back home so they can, be there for the birth of their child, and then they'll be there for, X amount of days or whatever that the unit wants to grant them, and then they'll come back and rejoin them on the deployment. That's usually not too long. Most cases I've seen, mainly like with combat deployments, it was like 15 days, so you didn't get a whole lot of time, but you still got to be there for the birth of the child. Another what if scenario is, what if there's a death in the family? So if it's before a deployment, well, then there'd be a little bit of time to stay behind, maybe to attend the funeral, to take care of some matters, whatever, but then the soldier is going to have to still join the unit on that deployment. If it happens during a deployment, well, then the family needs to contact the Red Cross. Usually those messages come through the Red Cross. They get sent up through the unit, through the chain of command. They get sent over to the soldier. Even if the soldier already knows about it prior to, from like phone calls or emails or whatever, it still has to go through the official kind of channels, and that is through the Red Cross. Once the unit receives that Red Cross message, then they can start executing for emergency leave. And they can allow that soldier to be able to go back home for, X amount of days to be able to be with the family, to maybe attend the funeral, those kind of things, and be able to take care of business before they probably have to come back and return for that deployment. Now keep in mind, these usually have to be like direct family members. Usually they don't often grant like emergency leave for like uncles and aunts or whatever. It's usually more direct family members like mothers and fathers, brothers and sisters, you know, a spouse, a child, things like that. Usually a little bit more distance like cousins and aunts and uncles, and you know, sometimes grandparents. That one kind of iffy sometimes too, but you know, more direct usually are the ones that are, you know, kind of granted these emergency leave situations for a death in the family. So let's go ahead and go with one more scenario, and let's say that a soldier gets in trouble either during a deployment or before a deployment. Now, if it's something serious enough like getting kicked out of the Army, well, then it doesn't matter if it's before a deployment or during a deployment, they're getting kicked out of the Army. So they're gonna get kicked out of the Army before a deployment, or if it's during a deployment, they're gonna get sent back home to get kicked out of the Army. So let's not assume that it's that serious. It's just something that's serious enough to constitute maybe Article 15, maybe a loss of rank, maybe some extra duty or whatever, but not serious enough to maybe get kicked out of the Army. So in those cases, you're still stuck on that deployment. You're not gonna get to stay behind to get your punishment. You're gonna probably still go on that deployment and then serve your punishment on that deployment. I've seen situations like that where soldier gets, you know, reduced in rank and they just go on that deployment with less rank now, and then on that deployment, they get stuck doing extra duty. For the most part, it's really the same even on that deployment. So if something happens where they got in trouble that wasn't, you know, bad enough to get them kicked out of the Army and they're just getting reduced in rank, maybe some extra duty, well, then they have to serve that while in Iraq. And I have seen that as well too, where they get stuck having to just do extra work while on extra duty to, you know, serve that time. So that one is a fairly easy one. Whether it's before deployment or during deployment, punishment's pretty much the same. You're gonna have to still fulfill that punishment. It's not like you get sent back to the States to do the punishment. No, you're gonna get stuck doing it while on a deployment, and it usually probably sucks even worse. I don't know. I guess it just depends on the circumstances, but either way, you still have to serve that punishment. So that's a handful of some of the common kind of what-if scenarios for either before a deployment or during a deployment, whatever the kind of case might be. If there's some other ones that maybe you're curious about for either before or during a deployment, maybe leave some comments down below. I'll try to answer some of the ones that I can, and then maybe some of my veteran friends can also answer some of them as well. Now, if you enjoyed this video, make sure to hit that thumbs up. Check out some links down in the description for my website, as well as some affiliate links and much more. Thank you so much for watching. I'm ThatChrisChaos, and I'll see you next time. See ya.